Assyrians were armed for attack by Russia. In September of 1914, the newspaper Baku reported the fiery destruction of some 30 Assyrian villages and the death of over 200 Assyrians who were burned alive. The newspaper reported,
"Among those victims were old men, women and children alike."
On October 3, 1914, the Russian Vice-Consul Vedensky, together with the local governor, visited the villages of Angar and Lavach, the sites of bloody massacres. Mr. Vedensky described what he saw as ferocious sights of jihad. He recalls seeing the burned bodies of slaughtered families, the remains of their burnt houses and homes that were still alight. In a correspondence dated 24 October 1914, Vice-Consul Vedensky spoke of Turkey's repressive actions against Assyrians in Shamdinan. He confirmed the growing daily number of Assyrian refugees to Urmia and the regions of Iran, and echoed the cry for help sent to the Russian consul by Markhnanish earlier that month. The following day, over 600 Assyrian refugees poured into Iran. The numerous pleadings to the Russians for help and armament of the Assyrians went virtually unanswered by Russia until Vedensky's interception of a coded message from the Turkish consul in Urmia. The message revealed the Turkish plan to capture the entire Urmian region for use as a base for future military action. The Russians were now ready to pay attention, and to avert the Turkish threat, they now turned to the Assyrians for manpower, inviting them to join the Allies against Turkey. In response and in anticipation of Russian support, Mar Benjamin Shuman promised aid to the Russian consul in Van by way of 40,000 volunteer Assyrian troops. These 40,000 volunteer troops were armed by Russia with a mere 2,500 rifles and shells. Ironically, fearing the strong Turkish force in Urmia and isolation from the main Russian forces, the Russian consul Vorontsov-Dashkov ordered the withdrawal of his troops from the region, leaving the Assyrians to fight the Turks alone and with inadequate resources. The Assyrian volunteer troops were not even informed of the withdrawal. They stood firm and fought the Turks, believing they had the support of Russian troops. The resultant devastation of Assyrian volunteer troops and civilians is attested to in the numerous eyewitness accounts and letters to General Vorontsov-Dashkov. One such letter told of horrific destruction by Turkish and Persian troops.
98 settlements were demolished. Villages were stripped naked. Males were murdered, and women, maidens and children were all taken captive.
The historical archives of the new Republic of Georgia hold the direct orders of Cevdet Pasha of the Turkish forces to cut down any Assyrians found in the Dilman and Gevutan regions. The Baku newspaper on 5 March 1915 told of the destruction of all 20 Assyrian villages in Dilman and the scattered bodies of Assyrians who had been murdered using axes, daggers and blunt instruments. The situation was critical. In November of 1914, Turkey entered the war with Germany as its ally. Outnumbered Assyrians were pressed to the mountains, far from the Russian-Turkish front line. The Turkish forces started arming the Kurds and provoking them against their Christian neighbours. The Turks also imprisoned the Patriarch's brother and other members of his family.
Your brother's life will be saved if your people promise to stop negotiating with the Russians and keep quiet.
The Patriarch replied,
I am the leader of my people. I cannot betray a nation for one person, even if he is my brother.
Hormuz was executed together with the other members of the Patriarch's family. But the support that Russia had promised was not delivered. The Patriarch wrote letter after letter to the Russian High Command.
I'm informing you that for more than 1 month already, my people have been fighting in the mountains against Turkish and Kurdish forces. Turks have occupied our villages and burned them all. The Assyrians have fled into the mountains and are dying from starvation. We are surrounded by enemies. Our situation is desperate and hopeless. I am begging you to send troops here in the name of Christ.
The absence of support from Russia increased the frequency and ferocity of Turkish attacks on Assyrian troops, and an attack was launched against the remaining Assyrian villages in Hakkari. The Assyrians fought in 14 battles with the Turks, despite being severely undermanned and underarmed. The newspaper Terek cites eyewitness accounts saying,
And then the killing of Christians began. Almost every villager was murdered in 30 settlements of the Gawa region. If Russians should come to the rescue, Assyrians will be saved. Otherwise, all of about 50,000 will be destroyed, for the Assyrians have very few guns or shells.
All that the Russians could do was advise the Assyrians to fight the Turks towards the Russian army in Persia. The Patriarch had nothing else to rely on. Several 100,000 Assyrian women and children took the desperate journey on the snowy mountains, which lasted a month. Countless numbers of them failed to get through. Over 22,000 Assyrian men, women and children sought refuge in American and French missions in Urmia. Their hopes were cruelly dashed. Witnesses and survivors talk of beatings and humiliation in the missions. There are accounts of the public hanging of the Orthodox Bishop Mar Ilya, along with numerous priests and deacons. Within a period of 5 months, over 10,000 Assyrians died of famine, disease and mistreatment in the missions. Their Russian allies did not respond to any cry for help. The Assyrians who were still alive then began the long journey from Urmia to Russia in the hope of being given refuge. The Baku newspaper reported a stream of mainly women and children moving over the 40-mile stretch from Urmia to Qushna. The Mashhad newspaper reported the journey of about 40,000 Assyrians riddled with peril, famine, disease, and the constant sight of dead and dying refugees along the way. Refugees who could not complete the long and harsh journey. By 1917, it was clear that Turkey would lose the war. The Russian allies had agreed to take the territory of Turkish Armenia, the Van region, the Assyrian mountain homelands, and Constantinople. But the start of the Russian Revolution in 1917 led to the disintegration of the Russian army and the eventual truce with Germany to cease all military action. The Russians withdrew from Persia while the Turks became prepared to take Azerbaijan. The Assyrians were left alone once again. On 16 March 1918, Simko, a Kurdish agha, invited the Patriarch Mar Benyamin Shumun to his house in the pretense of making peace. But what was planned was an Islamic attack towards a powerful Christian leader. Mar Shumun was assassinated, as were but a few of his 300 men. By this time, more and more Turks went to Urmia ready to exterminate more Christians. Assyrians had to leave. Their only destination was Hamadan. Assyrians and the Armenians, totaling 250,000, joined together in a journey away from their homelands. Muslim enemies were all around. There was fighting along the way. Death was everywhere. They kept going. There was no water, only snow. The horses were